Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Islamic customs and etiquette form an important life of a Muslim's existence in this world. Of course, he has to be very sensitive towards these customs and etiquette which Islam has prescribed for him. Now, one such directive which we are going to discuss today is the notion which relates to the burial etiquettes and rites which a deceased person has to pass through. We know that Islam has prescribed that whenever a person dies, he has to be buried in a grave. Now, the question that we're going to discuss today is that, is it prescribed by Islam that one should not cement the grave? Since this is attributed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it needs to be understood in its proper perspective. Now, there are certain directives in Islam which are given because the prohibited thing in itself is prohibited, and we are stopped from doing that. For example, we cannot, of course, indulge in adultery. So therefore, all things which lead to adultery at times are also stopped. For example, when the Quran says that one must lower the gaze, one must have modesty in one's gaze, then the actual objective is that this should not lead us to that heinous crime of adultery. Similar is the case with this particular directive that we are discussing today. Of course, what is forbidden is that we know that there is a tendency in many societies that people start worshipping the graves. So in order to stop this practice, we have been shown in the hadith, we have been told in the hadith that we should stop at a very early place, at a place which is much earlier than the actual directive, and that is that we should not even make the grave cemented, so that the issue of worshipping a grave does not even arise. Now, there are a number of directives, as I said, which are given in Islam, so that the actual directive, which is to be prohibited, a person is made to stop much earlier than that, much before that, and cementing the grave is one such directive. So if we have been stopped by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then the reason for stopping this is that this might lead to worshipping the grave, because people have a tendency to sit beside the grave and then start worshipping the person who was buried there, or at least presenting their petitions to him so that he can present those petitions before the Almighty. This is something which is absolutely prohibited, and it's an act of polytheism, it's an act of shirk. So therefore, the Prophet in his own time said that it is not good that one should cement the grave. Now, of course, as we are discussing this, it should be kept in mind that all such directives, they are not eternal directives. They are not eternal directives of the Sharia at all. They are primarily directives given as a precaution, so that the actual crime, the actual sin should not arise. So therefore, today in societies where there is no such tendency, where people have been absolutely cleansed of their beliefs, and there's no tendency of worshipping the graves, we can allow them to cement the grave, because this particular directive is based on the reason that people might indulge in worshipping the grave. So we can see in certain societies, if we think that people have become cleansed of these beliefs and they have been absolutely rehabilitated and reformed in this particular belief, then there is no harm if they are allowed to cement the grave. The bottom line, in other words, is that cementing the grave is not an eternal directive of the Sharia. It is dependent on the circumstances. It is primarily a precautionary directive given so that people might not exceed the limit, and after cementing the grave, they build mausoleums over it, for example, and then start worshipping the person who's buried there. And we find this practice in common in many Muslim societies of the past and even of the present age. So therefore, it is in our own well-being that we do not cement the grave, because there are certain societies in which this practice might be further strengthened. However, as I said, there can be societies in which this practice is not rampant at all, and people are absolutely reformed in their beliefs. In such societies, there would be no harm if people are allowed to cement the graves of their near ones. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.